listening?
This is the Rob Scott Show.
Damn.
I mean, really, like, if we're not trying to change the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Rob Scott Show. We've had a couple of starts and stops here trying to get internet to work well for us, but I'm really excited to be here and to do this with you, Sarah. We got a really good topic today, and I just want to check in. How you doing?
Good. It's good to see you. Yeah,
It's good to see you.
I'm eager to dive in. I wanted to talk about values today. Is that something that excites you?
I love values. I think we deeply misunderstand them. I think they're really important. And I think that if we can understand the difference between how we normally think about values and what actually happens in the moment that derails us from living into those values, I think we might have something really valuable to share with people today. So yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to back up a little bit. And what I'm excited to hear about from you and talk to you about specifically is that I was thinking about how we've been talking about beliefs and meaning making, and how our memory creates these modeling and models,
Mhm.
and how often as a new year starts, we do goal setting for the business, we do personal goal setting, and how really what feeds goals. I was like, why do we do that? And kind of what does that do? And it's kind of like, to me, I was thinking about how it was a way to support a value that we're carrying. And I thought,
Mhm.
well, where do our values come from? And it just led me, of course, all the way down the rabbit hole to this meaning making, which we have said is kind of underlining everything. So I was like, I would love to get into this with you today.
Yeah, for sure. It's a big deal. We've talked about sort of relevance realization and getting kind of a grip, like as we're in the moment and we're judging what's going on and we're trying to make meaning and all that stuff. And much of this is happening super unconscious to us, et cetera. But the value part of that is what really drives our behavior, right? We're going to move toward things we value, away from things we don't value. And then, of course, there's all kinds of judgments that have nothing to do with being valuable to us or not. As I look at a chair, I go, oh, that's a chair. That's actually a value. That's an interpretation. I'm calling a thing something else, and I'm making a judgment, but it's not necessarily a value judgment. Okay. So a value judgment is when we would add on top of that some type of valence, right? Some type of it's either pleasurable or unpleasurable. It's either good or bad. This is where we're starting to get into like overlaying duality. And this is very
Right.
automatic and base level to us because it's, and I don't want to speak into evolution as if I certainly know what happened, but with the models that we most think are accurate, we probably way back in evolutionary times had these impulses of good or bad, probably even before we developed what we might think of as a self-consciousness, right? So before there was even a self here, there was, a set of cells that was moving around trying to figure out what it wanted to move toward, what it wanted to move away from. And so at a very basic level, these are often psychologically associated with our impulses and our more of our unconscious mind, right? So these value judgments come up, and it's really important to differentiate what we might call a value judgment in the moment, how we end up deciding to navigate this moment, versus what we think of as our values in sort of the story of self, right? As we say to other people, oh, I value honesty and integrity and all these things. Oftentimes those are called our espoused values, right? They're what we say we value. And then moment by moment, we might actually value other things like being lazy or eating sugar or, doing these things that are outside our stated values. And so those end up being our expressed values or our behavioral values, what we actually do. And for many of us, when we get really attached to trying to be who we're saying we are, these kind of spoken values over time, and then our actual behavior is different. Like we want to be really productive in our values, but we actually are lazy in what we value in the moment. That ends up making a really deep psychological split for many of us. And we go, gosh, we start to take it on as a a self-limiting thing. Like there's something wrong with me. I'm lazy. I'm not good. I'm a procrastinator, those kinds of things. Does that make sense to start the conversation?
Yeah, like there's so much there, so I just kind of want to
Yeah.
respond to some of it. The story of self, like
Mm-hmm.
I really hope that our listeners get what you say when you mean that, because I
Mm-hmm.
love that kind of expression. Um, Rob has a talk that you can look up on YouTube, the power of story, which is a um really good framework for understanding how stories impact us. But the story of self, if we talked about self a couple episodes back, and that was really just like hit me in a new way, gave me a new perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I love how we're looking at how all these things beyond values kind of play into that story of self. So I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to highlight that. And I also think about how two things. One, how we say awareness is kind of curative. It brings a new sense of agency and a new kind of way to deal with things that we might not be able to see, and how values, if they're stemming from, there might be some unconscious values that are happening to us, which is why, to your point, when you're saying we say we want these things, like our value is fitness or savings or whatever, and then if you look at like how many people actually complete, kind of get to their goals, and then you think, why? Well, what are those unconscious behind the scenes forces kind of driving that? So yeah, I love that idea that we have two kind of sets of values that
it's very, and really
follow.
to gain any mastery, we talk about self-mastery, right? This idea to resist an impulse in the moment, to honor yourself, what you'd rather be, right? A higher version, like a higher value of yourself is like, oh, I'm going to value health and fitness, so I'm not going to eat the sugar. And then there's an impulse, which we value very highly, of, wouldn't it be delicious to eat some sugar right now in the moment? And self-mastery is when you can actually not just blindly act on that unconscious impulse and find yourself, 2 boxes of Oreos later, not happy with your behavior, and instead have that self-control to honor what you really saw as how you'd like to be, and then actually being that. This is all a play between this self-consciousness that we're creating. Now, this is happening very unconsciously.
In the story of self?
Yeah, it's the story of self that comes online. So I'd really like to break it up into thinking about time very differently. So if we consider time in any way, that's where self can live, right? Self is based in memory. It's based in an idea of who I've been before, who I'd like to be in the future, et cetera. And then that model of self kind of comes online in the moment. And then there's all these impulses that are happening in the now, right? So if we're truly in the now, and this is a big dramatic statement, but we could, if it's helpful, we can talk about it. If you're truly in the now, I would suggest that a self doesn't live there, right? For a self to be, there has to be the now plus the story of you psychologically. So what you're good at, your memories, everything that happened to you in the past. And as you bring that forward, you're painting onto this moment, this isness that is just exactly as it is, all our own past perceptions of self and what we value and all these things. However, we value a lot more than just our stated, kind of moral values for how we'd like to be over a year, our top 10 values or whatever. We value feeling good. We value food. We value all the activities that lead to reproduction. We value safety. We value, right? So in any given moment, I may have a stated value in that sense of self, but in the now, I'm actually up against these micro impulses and unconscious value judgments that I'm making in the moment. So let's say I really want to be charitable as a value, but in the moment, if I just do this one little thing that nobody will ever find out about, it'll mean a lot more money for me. I may end up acting against that higher value of being charitable to do something in the moment that seems valuable, et cetera. So there's a real difference between value judgments in the moment that are coming up and what we say we value in the story of who we'd like to be and how we want to be in the world.
Yeah. Okay. So I love this, and it's not quite how I was thinking about values at all. So I'm very fascinated. I kind of want to reiterate, and hopefully it's not redundant, but I think our listeners will appreciate it. I just want to clarify that I think when you say outside of time and now, it's important to say that when you say time, you're not talking about what's on a clock necessarily. You're not talking about 12 o'clock, you're talking about 2 o'clock. When Rob says time, he's talking about the judgment of a moment. So judging it as either
or
the
the
future,
judgment of
the past, imagination, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but add not just a moment, because that wouldn't be time, right? That would be the idea of one moment in time. I'm talking about when we're talking time collectively, which is like Rob, the self, has a whole history, right?
Right.
I have all my years and all that. In that ideation of Rob, I've got everything I've learned, everything I know, everything that's happened over time to Rob. So time has to exist for that Rob to be here, because it comes with all that memory and all that old stuff. So psychological time, right?
Yes, totally. Which is it's so funny. We've talked about how words, like we talked about the word model and what we visualize when we hear that word. So I was just thinking, I see a clock when you say time. I see a watch. I see literal seconds. And so I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, it's funny, not to be a jerk, but to play on words. It's really important because time is abstract to us. Meaning I can see a table, I can see a chair. And when you say you see a clock, you see a representation of a concept there. That's we're calling something 3 PM, and the clock is very real, but what it represents is very abstract. So when we think about the abstraction of time and we say, why does a time immediately get represented in space on a piece of paper as an arrow, right? So all of a sudden it's got a direction to it, right? So time, this abstract thing, immediately has a direction. It's got backward and forward. We know that we can only experience it going forward. All of a sudden it's not this abstract thing. To understand it, we have to turn it into something that we can kind of see or ideate, which we do on paper with an arrow or whatever. And then this moment, if we were to judge a specific moment and have it go by, we'd have an idea of that moment that passed, and we could model what that moment was like. Or I'm talking about experiencing the now, which is the ongoing presence of everything that's literally happening to you in this moment. And the thing that I really want to call out is that in the past, we've talked about lenses coming in and altering that. A lot of our lenses are based in these value judgments. The lenses that are most charged for us are the ones that have value, right? They're the things that we most care about. If I value being in part of a certain political party, or I value money, or I value usefulness of things. And there are certain things that we would obviously value, like safety, like, health, like, things like that. But then there are values that we've created as people and believe in, and they feel very real, but they're really just agreements, like money and exchange of value and all that stuff. And we have a lot that we could talk about when we value money and how that's slightly different. But
definitely,
if we don't understand that in the moment, what comes online is an unconscious impulse of value. This person is good, this person is bad. That impulse is, the isness of it has no value. We're pasting unconsciously and immediately value on top of it, like a lens. And so here's the really important thing. And if we could get this would go a long way to really be free of this whole confusion, is that we are perceiving the value that we're putting onto it as if it's a perception, as if it's true and factual, rather than realizing that we're doing a conception. So we're mistaking a concept for a perception, right? And that's what I mean when I say we treat lenses like they're fact or they're true, because they're invisible to us. We can't see how it's being altered. So because of your history, rather than actually being free in this moment with with a real connection to isness, what we don't see is that unconsciously and automatically, all these value judgments are coming online. And that's going to deeply affect our behavior in the moment. And what that's potentially in conflict is the self we'd like to be, which is another set of old stated values or thought values in the past. But what we actually value in the moment is much more complex than that. So if we can see that this is happening, we get a couple of really valuable things. We start to be able to challenge the fact of our values in the moment and potentially change them. Like maybe that sugary treat isn't as attractive as my impulse kind of told me, if I can get more in touch with the isness of the moment. And the other thing, we could remove judgments of people and other things that we tend to get stuck in because we keep pasting our old values onto this moment very unconsciously.
Yeah. So words are going to just continually amaze me as we kind of dissect them, because I'm thinking, there's value, like a morality, like I value integrity or whatever. There's value, like is something valuable. There's now, I'm hearing you say value judgments, which I like, which is kind of like, the discernment around what do we do about this? And then there's like, espoused values, the things that we like are kind of woven into our story of self. So there is a lot here. There's way more than I already thought there was a lot here. But I guess my immediate question back to you is kind of, how do we draw the line then between like a value judgment? Because I might choose, if a building is burning and my value is self-love and self-care, but a building's burning and I see like a baby that I can grab and I think I can get it and save its life. that's a value judgment in the moment. Like, I'm going to risk my health and safety, which normally I hold in high regard, for
Mhm.
somebody else's. I guess I'm curious about your thoughts on the relationship between like a value judgment, as you're saying, in the now, outside of time, versus like what I carry in my story of self of, I'm Sarah and these are my values and this is
Yeah.
kind of what makes up who I am.
Well, that's a great question. Let's look at it a little bit more closely. You saving a baby is probably also another value that you hold, which is being kind and being helpful, and maybe even wanting to be a hero if you can be, like those types of things that we don't necessarily, like, we didn't do it in a goal setting exercise, but it's, if you're a good person, that's also something you value. Like, we value helping strangers because that tends to keep us safer, and we know that if we ever needed help, strangers might help us, right? So that's why reciprocity and these things are sort of baked into the system of what we value. Let me back up for a second and say that use value, right? Something just being valuable to do is pretty obvious. And I think we all could come closer to agreeing that, like, wow, if it's got use, if it's useful, if what you think that thing's going to do, it really does it, that would be something of value to you. But what we mean at the heart, you pointed out all these different kinds of value that we're talking about. At the heart of that is this valence, good or bad, duality kind of stance or judgment, right? The only reason that we like moral values is that when we're considering our moral values, we're considering society and how would I like to behave to other people and all those things. But we also have very personal values. When no one's looking, how do I want to be? In the moment when no one's actually looking, what would be maybe the fun, pleasurable thing to do that's outside of who I'd like to be in front of others and who I'd like to be in my ideal self, right? So like these things are all competing. When we're the most messy is when we have deep value conflicts, like we value two things that can't both kind of happen together, right? And we could come up with a bunch of examples, but we know what that is, where it's like we'd really like to not work at all, but we really want to make a ton of money, right? So it's like, well, those are probably not going to go together unless you hit the lottery or inherit a lot of money or whatever. And if that's something we're dealing with day to day to day, we're going to be facing a very deep value conflict in the story of self, right? So I think,
and can I can I
Mhm.
just hop in there, because that's kind of perfectly getting me to what I was wondering about,
Cool.
which
Yeah,
is for me personally, just to talk from my own stance, is that I think one of the worst feelings that I can have is when two of my strongest, like my most
hmm
proud, good values conflict. And we've
Yep.
talked in this podcast a lot about suffering and kind of like, out of control thinking and depression and emotions for me, and how that kind of makes you question what's
Yeah.
going on. And for me, that occurs when that happens. That to me is the worst feeling, because it makes me think the story of self, as we've talked about these models, the self is a model, and the story that I carry about myself, all of a sudden I don't have it because
Yes.
I can't, it's lost. And I
hmm
think, oh my God. And that's what kind of brought me to the values, where I'm like, that's for me when I start to feel like kind of
And it's
detached.
not in the way that we're talking where you're putting self down consciously. We're
Exactly.
talking, it's you actually have a confused self in that moment. You're like,
Confused
what,
self,
who am I
right?
supposed to be? What am I supposed to do? What am I
Right.
supposed to value here? How do I behave? Because values are what are giving us the energy to push our
Right.
behavior around, right? We're going to
Right.
move toward what we value and away from what we don't value in all our actions and behaviors generally. The other thing too, that as you were describing that, I wanted to point out a very common example of where values get conflicted in relationship, when the other partner is doing something that we feel is causing harm to us individually. We value us individually and what our needs are, but then we also have this overlapping value of the relationship. So should I put down my own value to honor what they want? Do I do that too often? Is it time for me to say no and hold a boundary, right? That gets very confusing, because now you have two people valuing different things, trying to act as a unit. And then if you take that further and you think of larger groups, right, you can start to have value conflicts all over the place. And so if the group doesn't really know what it values, and as
Right.
individuals don't all continue to value that thing, they will drift in and out of really caring about the group or honoring what the group is, et cetera. And not
Well,
to
and just
just,
to highlight
yeah,
what feels hard about that, right? Because you're like, okay, well, cognitively, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. But that feeling of like, that's why I love that you said this story of self, and
hmm
kind of are talking more at these I like how you break everything kind of down, because I feel like we always start at the wrong place, because we don't understand our mind and how it works and our thinking, and we can't always leave, time, I'll
Yeah.
put in quotes, time, in the way that you're talking about. And so I love that you bring it back to that, because what happens there is we all in a group, if that happens, or in a partnership, that story of self that we normally carry, and if we're healthy and we're doing things psychologically sound, that's a good story, right? A helpful
Hmm.
story. It just starts to dissolve. And then there's really no difference between somebody who feels very kind of together and healthy versus someone who's like suffering,
Hmm.
because we are so attached to that story of self. We're so unconsciously modeling, all the things that you said on recent episodes, the unconscious modeling, the attachment to a meaning, the construction of what we believe self is and not
Hmm.
changeable. It all comes into play. Like values, I think, put a light on that, and it kind of shows these other parts that we've been talking about, all kind of acting at once,
Yeah,
and I think that's
totally.
so fascinating.
Totally. I mean, it's really important for the average listener that really doesn't know what I mean by a healthy no self, right? Just being in isness, being fully present, all that. If that's not available to you, the extra weird part of this podcast isn't going to make as much sense. So I definitely want to I want to spend time on that so that we really get that. If we put that down for a second and just talk about what most people are thinking about valuing, is there people who consistently have a sense of self. They don't have any idea what it is to put that down. That feels very persistent and real. Ultimately, I'd really love to break people up with that more and more. Like that would be the most important thing we could do. But within the story of self, even if we're not going to challenge self, managing your own values is this ongoing, deep, important thing, right?
Yeah,
And
it never
so
feels done. It's like
it's,
thinking, like it's whether it's good, bad, or other, it's always happening,
yeah. And so think about somebody who would come to our coaching and say, all I want to do is become an entrepreneur. If I did that, all my problems would be solved. Whether they see that that's not really true or not, it feels like that. Whatever's loudest, whatever we're valuing most, like for a
Mhm.
kid, if I could just get the PS5, that's all I want. I'll be done then. That's great. Then you get the PS5, you get the thing that you value, and immediately all these other values start to pop up, all
Mhm.
these other lack things that I don't have, but I could imagine having. I'd really like to have them. So that's what value is going to move around. As soon as you have enough money, then it's going to feel like, wow, I haven't been spending enough time with my relationships. As soon as you're doing that, oh, wow, I've let the business atrophy. Okay, now my health's out of control, right? I need to move back here. So it's constantly moving around. This is what being alive is. We're going to constantly be valuing different things. The
Well, I want
deep,
to highlight that,
yeah,
because I mean, for our listeners, so like Rob often says to me, I don't want to solve the one problem. Like
yeah,
I think I have the answer for bigger things. And so we've said that before, but you just said it really well there.
yeah.
How we get the thing that we most want. Of course, we can do that. There's different ways to do that, but it's not permanent. And what's
Hmm.
more permanent is having a better grasp on all this stuff. So
Yeah. And so
that's
how do you know what you want, right? This is what deeply goes back to values. And
right.
how do our values get messed up? We end up, you can actually value your own values, whether they're accurate and helpful or not, but all of a sudden you value what you value, right? In the idea of you, it's like my values are super important. But then if you can't have that self mastery in the moment, if as these other subtle things are coming up, and we don't see that we're creating a self that's invisible to us, we don't see that that self world model that we're putting in is overlaying all this historical value, what we were taught was valuable, what our experience has said is valuable to us, et cetera. On further inspection, if we were more conscious of this, we might make very different behavioral choices in the moment if we could know how to free ourselves of our value. Okay. So, because values are judgments in the moment, because they are based on what self thinks it wants and needs, if you can come into isness as one move, right? So if you're self, yes, we can help you manage your values differently, define them, start to live closer to them. And that is incredibly valuable and really important. And I think there's a lot of coaching out there that can help with that, including ours for sure.
Mhm.
However, if I were to tell you, oh, just stop valuing that one thing and value this instead, like if you just install these 10 values in this order, your life would change completely. That's actually not going to work, because you don't get to decide what you value in that way. Now you can decide what the story of you values, but you'll find in your behavior that you will value this bad act at this one day, or doing this. And if we think in a group,
and that's a value judgment. That's what you're talking
yeah,
about.
well, it's
value
because
judgments.
the part of it being a judgment is the automatic part of it, right? Like until
Okay.
we're conscious of this, it's coming online automatically. It's like an impulse. It's from the part of the brain that is already doing this judgment. That's like, I like food, I like sex,
Right.
I like
Right.
money, I
Right.
like power, I like safety, I like all these things. And so in a moment, if you're feeling very safe, that's not going to be something you act on. But if all of a sudden you feel unsafe, you're going to watch yourself behave and value in that moment very different things. And maybe even if you feel unsafe enough, respond violently or run and abandon somebody that you care about, which both of those may be deeply against your stated values and who you'd like to be. But in the moment, you got overwhelmed with the impulse and what you were truly valuing in that moment. So what I really want to do is I want to make bigger this moment and show you that that is actually the place that if you can gain consciousness, that's the only place that you actually have choice and free will, assuming free will is even a thing. Like where choice and free will emerges is truly in this moment. That's when you can move your attention. That's when you could choose a new behavior. You can't choose a new behavior in the future. You're not there yet. And you can't choose a new behavior from the past. That's already happened. So the only place that we have any real agency or free will is truly in this moment. So if we can start to see that we're painting these values on, that they don't have to be, we may not actually have to value those things that way. That impulse of value may not be accurate. We can put a pause or some self-mastery in the middle of what these impulses are, check in with what our stated values are, and actually choose to behave very differently moment to moment. So if you think about like an addict or an alcoholic who says, I'm not going to drink, if the story of not drinking means I've got 3 weeks sobriety and I can't give it up, if that person has half a beer on an impulse, right? They get very unconscious. They have an impulse. They go, oh, it's a good idea. I'm going to have half a beer. If the story is now I've broken my sobriety, I don't value myself anymore, right? And all of a sudden, that sobriety I had isn't worth anything because I broke it. Well, that person may decide to go drink for 2 more years and wrap themselves around a tree in a car accident, drunk driving. Whereas if somebody else drinks a half a beer, decides, oh, wow, it's not about this stated value of anything. In this moment, I need to realize, wow, I've made a mistake. Let me not keep making this, not put too much value on the story of your 3 weeks sober or whatever. Now you have an ability to go, wow, I don't want the rest of this beer, put it down, go right back to sobriety and change. Same thing around weight loss, same thing around doing business things. That's where we have this power of agency. But if we're not clear on how these impulse value things come up, and how we're painting those on automatically, then we remain much more just being bumped around by our impulses and much more unconscious to the whole process.
Yeah. And I think that, it's just kind of staying on the self, because we talked about lenses recently as well. And I think you said a couple things in there that were kind of newer to me that kind of helped me get a different perspective. But if values are coming from like these lenses, which you had said the majority of us are unconscious, is what you said. Or the majority of what we do is unconscious to us, including value creation, meaning making and stuff. And it's woven into this model of self.
Yeah.
Then what kind of strikes me about what you're saying is it just highlights this kind of illusion or delusion that we're in, where I think, okay, there's these 3 core things about me as my story. And I'm like, yeah, but I get that that's my story, right? This is my construction of me. But then I think, but Rob, but if you look at my actions 9 out of 10 times, I'm either consciously or unconsciously enforcing these 3 things that are written to my story of myself that I call my core values. And then that one thing happens, and all the other things, like you talked about how memory kind of brings things online for you unexpectedly or in different contexts, right? Our story of self can all of a sudden change when we're around our parents, we're become more of a child. When we're, with our partner, we're a spouse. Like we have all these contexts for ourselves. All of a sudden, I find myself in a context where I automatically or unconsciously go against these 3 values. It doesn't matter if that was the first time, the 50th time. I mean, if you talk about the drinking, right? Like, let's say I'm sober for, 30 years versus like I messed up 2 weeks ago and the month before that and the 6 months before that. It not that it doesn't matter, right? Because you want to have consistency of character and all that, but that's not quite what we're talking about in this kind of conversation. I'm just noticing the power of really not seeing those lenses, not
Yeah.
having agency, not being in kind of that now window that you're talking about, where we do have that free will, and how we're so easily tricked into this permanence of, oh, but I never do that, and I haven't done
Mhm.
that in years, and it's not who I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when that happens, and it probably will, right? Because none of us are perfect. I'm going to go and say, I'm sure I've acted outside what I would say my core values
Yeah.
are. If you can't kind of shift it or see it or understand it or whatever, then it kind of it can destroy you.
It
It can,
destroys your sense of self, right?
right? And you mull
So
over it, and why did
yeah.
I do that, and who really am I? And it just, like, one little thing can just derail someone. And it's sad to, that makes me sad, because I'm like, it doesn't have to be that, right?
Now you
You're
have a
really like
suffering story of self,
right now
right?
you have a different, totally different story.
And if we say story of self, it feels not real, but in the moment it's nothing but real. I mean, that's exactly what the human condition is.
Yeah.
It's a self that is at odds with its own values, its own, what it thinks it is, who it thinks it should be, etc. The more that we can gain agency over how this whole thing works and how we see this, you will tend toward actually being really what you value, knowing what you value, really being that. And then something that we generally value as humans is somebody else who's really their word, right? There's a lot of reasons for this, but if you're not your word, I can't trust you. You might be dangerous to me. If you are your word, not only are you potentially trustworthy and I can believe you, and if we tend to value the same things, now we're on the same team in some sense, all that
Sure.
is really good. But even in the predictive modeling part of me, if I trust you, I can put you in a category of, oh, I don't have to keep reconsidering this person, right? So it's calorically less expensive, which is why we value trusting somebody and knowing, and I don't have to keep checking in. I can just put you in the category of like, oh, trustable person, good. I don't have to reconsider it. But that lack of reconsidering, that same advantage that gives us into a story of who Sarah is to me. And so Rob, the self, can trust Sarah, the self, as an employee and a friend and all these other things, right? If I come into the moment, if I can't see that that's going on, and let's take it away from judging people in that way, but now I'm judging kind of everything in the moment, like what's in my fridge, what should I do later today, what's going on. The valance of good or bad, that base lens of duality of all my past judgments are coming online. But here's the thing, they're affecting my new judgments now, right? So I don't see that I'm adding it, right? I think we talked about Uncle Tony or something once, like if Uncle Tony
Oh
comes
yeah,
in,
dry
right?
humor.
And but if he's a bad guy to me, that value judgment comes online as soon as I see him without being reconsidered. Then I take it to be true. And now I have another example of him being a bad guy, whether he's done anything new bad to me or not. So now we get in time, the history of repeated Uncle Tony as being a bad guy, right? Whether he's done that or not. But I had another experience. I threw the valence label on him unconsciously of he's a bad guy. And we talked before about how that might change my behavior and all that stuff. But if I keep that story of him, now I just have another example. So guess what? The next time Tony comes up, it's that much easier because it's now been true over time to me to just call him that again and call him that again. We do this about money. Do you think green paper would be valuable to somebody who didn't have the history of knowing that that is something that's valuable to have and exchange things for?
I mean, if you've ever held a foreign currency, I'm sure
it feels odd,
I'm
right?
like, it feels like play money or monopoly money. You know what I mean?
Right. And so like that shows us that we're painting on these value structures as soon as we see things. They're happening automatically to us. And so the question really is, at one level, is there a possibility for you to actually drop your value judgments? Is there a possibility for you to come fully back into isness in a meaningful way and just feel all the sensations and all the impulses without knowing their value and saying, I know that's good, I know that's bad, I know whatever? Because what we find in the good and bad judgment, quite often, something that we're dreading, like losing a job or having to move from a house or leaving a certain state to go somewhere else, and we really don't want to do it, we actually find after we do it, it was an amazing thing, right? It was really great. We didn't have it right. We didn't value it right in the beginning because we were afraid or we didn't want change, or these other things that we thought we valued seemed louder, right? I value consistency. So this move out of the state is such a bother. I don't want to do it. Then we do it. And we realize, wow, that was incredibly valuable to do. So this mix of how we're interpreting and how can we deal with something that we're calling bad or we're valuing bad, but maybe it's unchangeable at this point. So this can help us learn to accept those things, deal with them differently, change our behavior, get more aligned with what our stated values are and who we'd really like to be as a person. That's what's on the table here.
Yeah. Well, and the other kind of angle that I wanted to talk about with you in this episode around this idea is looking at the values conflicts and this kind of agency and flexibility, like you're saying, to just see that good or bad, the duality and the lenses from a psychological perspective. That's really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we have to be, well, we don't have to, but I highly recommend that you're able to do that, because if you're like me, that's a terrible feeling to have, where you either dissolve your sense of self, you're confused, or you're like, I love both these things and I have to pick. Like, nobody wants that feeling. But from a sociological perspective, we all have to master this, because if you look at things like maybe your values don't align, like the bigger values of a society and what a society needs. So for example, and this might date our podcast, but where we are right now in the world with climate change and where we are right now with a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
The pandemic is requiring medication, supplies. Like I've seen masks all over the ground now, right? Like environmentally, what we're doing doesn't always match with like maybe what the climate people say we need to do to save planet Earth, right?
Yeah.
I'm not. Oh, sorry.
No, I don't want to cut you off, but there's a really important. I'll try to remember it. Go ahead, finish.
I was going to say neither are. I'm not. I don't want my listeners to think that it's a good or bad. I think I'm not judging either, but I'm saying when you have two things that are important conflict like that, and you personally, psychologically, don't have the agency to control one person, then how are we as groups going to be able to kind of like prioritize and manage this?
Yeah, totally. And it's super important. And I think it's a good analogy to look at climate change as an example. And let's just assume if there's any climate deniers listening or don't think humans are participating, let's just put that idea down for a second and just assume that climate change is 100% real. There's real important things we should do about it. We could imagine that, most humans, if asked, and if this is right or wrong, I haven't looked at any stats, but let's just imagine that we could all agree, boy, it's important for us to be in balance with our environment. And it seems we're not right now. So it's important for us to do this. This is like that stated value on a personal level. Right? I really do value it. It's really true. I see it. But in the moment, there's all this other stuff going on. So if we really felt individually in each of us that climate change was imminent, we're going to be killing future generations, maybe the next generation, maybe 2 generations from now. Like if we really got in touch with that truly, you would think that we would change our now behavior much more deeply than we are, but we don't, because we start to go, wow, it's okay, maybe a Tesla would help, but I don't have a plug at my house, so I can't buy one of those. So I'm just going to keep driving the gas car. Wow, nobody else has really gotten rid of gas cars yet. So I guess someone else is handling that, right? So we do what we immediately value, which is getting to work, continuing to make money, staying safe, still trying to keep up with the Joneses, doing all those things. And that bigger value, or, further away in time value, becomes not as important moment by moment. Yet if you ever ask us, like, yes, that really matters, gosh, we got to do something about that, but our behavior day to day doesn't honor that, right? And so when I said bigger value, if you think about that, becomes difficult. So let's go back to the personal level. If I have a personal value of honesty, I'm set up that now I'm expecting myself in some way to always be honest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Never, ever not be honest. So it's one of those things where it's going to be very loud to you, and all of a sudden there may be a situation where dishonesty is the most important thing to do. Like you really have to get out of something that would be deeply dangerous if you didn't do a white lie, or to be polite and protect somebody's feelings, you decide to not tell the whole truth or whatever. My point is that if you hold this big value and you hold it so tightly that you're upset if you break it, real life discerns that there are times where it's just more complex than that, and you may break it, right? So again, if we think about in the group setting, environment change or whatever, if we hold that as a value, there's still maybe tons of times where we're not exactly pointed toward that one big value, because we value a ton of other things, certainly in the immediate, and even other big values like keeping the economy going, right? So somebody would argue, well, if we stop oil production, that's going to kill the economy. And so now we have these conflicting values of the environment versus the economy, et cetera. So navigating those it's complex on the individual level, as we've already shown, very complex to be honest with ourselves and know what we value and really live into those values in any meaningful way. At a group level, as soon as you have one person not participating, it can build what's actually known as a race to the bottom. So let's think about companies, and this is really important. If you think about companies, and let's say we all decided that nobody should, farm the ocean anymore, or we might actually kill the ocean for all the world, and that would kill our food chain, and that would be deeply bad. If all of a sudden we notice that there's an opportunity to farm the ocean in some way, and we might know like, wow, I value not doing that, I'm not going to do it. But we notice that other companies are doing it and getting away with it because maybe there's not regulations or whatever. Like they're going to break the agreement to personally benefit. All of a sudden I might decide, well, even if somebody else could do that, I should be the one to do it because I'm the better one. So we end up having what's known as a race to the bottom. So one person starts to break the rules. And because of that, the other people can't outcompete that advantage of kind of cheating or whatever. So everybody starts cheating. And so we all do a race to the bottom. So meaningfully quitting, farming the ocean or whatever we might need to do becomes more difficult in groups because we're not only in control of ourselves, we're in control of like, what's this whole group going to do? And many of our problems are global, and they have to do with, do we know what we value? Can we value the same things, et cetera, et cetera? So that becomes very difficult to manage.
Yeah, I mean, something that we often talk about, but I personally think society would be a lot farther, is if we could really see and understand about how these the psychology of self, or learning about self, or dissolving self, is actually a kind of a straight line, or a very clear line to the sociology of like what we're doing as a society. And I know you've been working really hard to kind of help people understand that in a new way. And I love that. Another kind of example that's a little bit related, a little bit unrelated, but I was thinking about parents right now who are having to both want to educate their kids, and their kids' education looks like putting them in front of a screen all day. And historically, it's been a conversation about parenting and screen time and all that, right? So what ends up happening, let's just imagine a scenario where your kid is like, needs the extra help in school, really needs to show up, needs to sit there and focus. That means they're sitting in front of the computer 8 hours a day. So you feel bad when they're not getting the education they need. You feel bad when you're sitting them in front of the computer. And the whole source of it is because you love your kid and you want them to thrive and to be educated and all that. So the whole kind of, just to shine light on the outcome, if you can't do this, right? We often be like, if you can't do this, this is what it looks like. Then all day you feel bad.
Totally.
When the whole origin of it was to love your kid. And you're just like, if you can't manage it, then nobody wins. And which is just emphasizes why in the moment you have to be able to make a value judgment and then let it settle. Don't let it kind of fester. And I don't know if you do this or not, because you have a very clear understanding, but I know I do this. And that's how I know I'm having a value conflict, is because it feels like there's just this thing that
totally,
I'm like, oh, I'm okay with this, but I'm not, because it kind of eats at
it's
me.
what almost all psychological confusion feels like, right? It's like, I don't understand what to do. I'm not sure what to do here because I value multiple things. And the more that we're attached to those values and insist on them, the more we're going to be open to that confusion and that suffering. So this idea, so if we go back and we say, okay, on the individual level, how can I be in touch with what my stated values are? And then in the moment, do my behavioral values so that they're the highest value. And we talked about the need for some type of self-mastery, which is breaking up with just that valence, impulse or reflex that comes up as good or bad, liking it. Can we see those and not have that just immediately inform us as a perception or a fact, but realize, oh, could I play with that a little bit, right? Can I break up with that value? And if I can put enough space to not have the drink or not have the cotton candy or decide to go for the run or do whatever the behavior is that's more aligned with what I'd like to value in the story of me. Collectively, we're going to need to do this too. For each company to not do that impulsive move to the thing that's actually bad for the collective, but good for them, right? Because the analogy is that in the moment when I want the cotton candy, that's good for me in that moment, in the sense of flavor and taste and breaking the rules and having fun that moment, but it doesn't match that bigger idea I want of myself. So the sacrifice is I have to give up that immediate pleasure, right? That immediate advantage in the moment of lots of sugar and lots of fun, whatever, for a bigger idea of who I'd like to be. Collectively, companies and governments and how we group together and decide these things, we need to understand what is the group value. And as we participate in that, can we be talking about what we're struggling with our own values and why this is difficult, but also give it the space to not just immediately follow the immediate advantage for the shortcut or the quick thing or whatever, so that we can stay actually managing to these bigger values that matter to us. And the more conscious we can be with how these impulses are affecting us, honestly, the more understanding with ourself that we can be, that heals a lot of that division, right? That self-love, that self-acceptance, to realize, wow, I'm not always going to be in control. Some of this is unconscious. If I've taken half that beer, I can actually mark that up as like, wow, that was not me at my best. That was a bit unconscious. But then when I become conscious of it, make a new decision, and then it really only was a half a beer instead of like a bender that, was a real problem in my life or whatever. For companies acting in the goodness of society, right? We need to decide, how do we value? How do we want these things running? And then the companies are going to have a little self-mastery also to not cheat. And of course, we can try to set up laws to stop that. And there's other complexity there that can help as well. But until we can see this on the individual level and how we do this in groups and how we value showing up as companies, et cetera, and as governments and as nations, it's going to be very difficult to get meaningfully better at this. But you really can when you become more conscious of this. Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. And I guess also just to highlight two more things, which is that attachment to duality, where you can't even see that there's kind of, we'll call it a gray area, like watch that, because, like I said, PP for the pandemic and helping climate change could conflict. And if you can't see apart, you can't pull that apart. If you can't see that screen time and education might need to coexist, you're in a world of hurt. But beyond that, the bigger picture, kind of back to what we've been talking about here together, the fundamental shift is that they're like, what I love what you said, in the now is where we really, if free will exists, that's where we have it. And so if, all the other stuff is all, stuff in our heads, right? It's not as.
Yeah. So just really get connected that what you're valuing in the moment is coming online very unconsciously to you. It's based on tons of stuff you've valued in the past. It's not just your stated values, but it's all of your feeling and sense values as well. Is this going to feel good? Is that going to be pleasurable? Is that going to make me happy? Is that going to be fun to do? And that the more that's in conflict with your stated values, the more you're going to end up with those confusing value conflicts, et cetera. The way to escape this in a meaningful way is to not just take that base first interpretation as fact, and instead notice the sensations and notice what your unconscious is doing to you and be more present with it, rather than just lost in the story of, I've got to behave, I've got to make a choice, how do I move forward? It's really like coming back to breath, being in isness, realizing, wow, I've got these impulses. Maybe I act on them, maybe I don't. And now you're bringing a layer of wisdom to those decisions and those choices. And as you do set, like many of us wouldn't even be able to sit down and say, I value these 10 things, right? We're not in touch with what our even stated values are.
Right.
So getting in touch with those is helpful. And then trying to manage your life to those with some self-mastery and with some understanding of the impulses that come up in the moment lets you move much, much further. And at the heart of that, having some capacity to even drop the model of self meaningfully in the moment, moment by moment. What dissolves with all of that? It's the self that's valuing things, right? That is the construct that has duality and has good and bad and has toward and away. It is self. So the biggest shortcut here is to see if you can actually dissolve self by just coming into a sensation of breath or whatever, moment by moment, as necessary to reset your values and come back to like what really matters here, et cetera.
Well, I could not have asked for more out of this. This is exactly kind of the conversation I wanted to have. And I'm continuing to learn more about myself as we continue on recording these. And I hope also that means that people listening are learning more too. So I will say personally, thank you for that conversation. I thought it was very valuable.
Good. I hope it was valuable and I hope it was clear. We can definitely come back and loop around. There's more to say about this. But for now, let's tell everybody and suggest that we all are kind to ourselves and everybody else. Appreciate you listening so much. Thanks, Sarah, for being here. We'll talk to you really soon. Bye-bye.